And welcome to another edition of South Texas Crossfire. This is Attorney Joe Flores reminding you to join us each and every week right here on KTMB with the Lopez family. Special thanks to my good friend Carlos Lopez, celebrating over 20 years of broadcasting on television, and his father, who passed away in 2011, who wanted public service messages that impact Latinos, that impact all our community and all our South Texas brothers and sisters here. And one of the programs that we've been bringing on and public service messages has been on law enforcement. As law and order and medicine are topics that really captivate our audience. And with that, we are here and honored to have an executive board member of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and that's Diane Goldstein. She is formerly with Redondo Beach, California Police Department. Welcome, Diane. How are you this morning?
Thank you very much, Joe, for having me on in Texas. How's Corpus Christi?
Oh, very, very hot. I must say, 106 degrees. So I'm wearing this suit inside in AC, but I wouldn't dare to go outside. And we are going to go to California and visit the family here in about a month or so. So we're looking forward to that, where it's nice and cool. With that being said, I want to thank you for coming on. I know the important work that Law Enforcement Against Prohibition is doing. I just saw the documentary with HBO on drugs. And it was very successful. I think that it said how to sell drugs in America, how to make a living at selling drugs. And it was a sort of backhanded, sort of chuckling look at a very serious topic that will show you how to sell drugs and how easy it is in America. And that's the thing is, we brought on one of your members of L.E.A.P last time, who said the drug war is failing. And how would you respond to his view that we are just throwing millions of dollars upon millions of dollars away on trying to prohibit drug use in America?
You know what is L.E.A.P, since I've only been a member since 2010, really clarifies the message and shines a spotlight on so many of the failures of the drug war. And one of the things that I kind of look at is what we've done is, because all of us have worked in the trenches, and not just as police officers, and I think that's the amazing thing about L.E.A.P. You have current, retired, and former criminal justice professionals that represent the entire spectrum, from cops to judges and prison guards, DEA agents, the military, who have all stepped back and said, you know what, we love our country, we did our duty, we did it ethically to the best of our capabilities, and we recognize that we have to do something else. Because the hypocrisy of the drug war is that the drug war is more harmful than, in some aspects, just allowing people to use drugs.
Well, and it's so disturbing to people to say, well, wait a minute, we're just going to let addicts use drugs, we're going to let people use methamphetamine. Doesn't that just compound the problem? I know my compatriots on the right side of the aisle will say, no, we need to lock these people up, and treatment's important, but it's not the foremost importance. Protecting the public is. How would you respond to that?
There's a couple things that I'd like to really clarify. Is one of the things that people always focus on is the drugs itself instead of the consequences of prohibition. So, in fact, what is driving the violence is the illicit black market. It's the high profitability. Currently across the world, as I think the international drug market has been pegged at $330 billion. And so one of the ways to reduce violence and to reduce the harms of drug abuse in America is by taking drug abuse and putting it into a public health model. And so, we can be like other countries have already done. Let's take Portugal as an example. What they do is they can have up to 10 days worth of drugs. And that's any drugs, methamphetamine, marijuana, ecstasy, LSD. And if you get caught with drugs in Portugal, simply drugs, is you're sent to a almost like a medical administrative court where they do an assessment to see if you're a drug addict, and if in fact you are, then what they do is they refer you to a medical program to help you with your drug addiction. They don't mandate it, they don't force it. And so instead of using coercive drug courts like we are that are having very limited success, I would rather see drug courts than incarceration, but they still have very limited success the way we run them. What they've seen in Portugal is they've seen their heroin addiction rate drop by over 50%. Portugal back in 2000 had the highest heroin addiction rate in the world. And so similar, I mean, Portugal is very similar to Spain, very similar to Mexico, Catholic, conservative country. And if you talk to folks from the Portuguese government and to law enforcement, they would never go back to what it used to be. Consequently, because of emphasis on treatment, prevention, and rehabilitation versus enforcement, they've also seen a significant reduction in overdose deaths, HIV rates, spread of other diseases because of drug abuse. And interesting enough, they've seen a reduction in the overall prevalence use of drugs by kids between the ages, I think, about 13 and 19.
Well, and I mean, do you think that model or that delivery, people will say, well, that's Portugal, that's Spain, we're a different country, we're not as homogenous as Portugal, we're not as homogenous as Spain, it can't work in America, we've got 100,000 gang members in Chicago alone, and areas where the police are even afraid to enter, and drugs are just spinning out of control, and we need more bars, more prisons, and so people are still on that, will say, it won't work here. What is your response to that?
I'll tell you what my response to it is. I spent almost 22 years in law enforcement, and clearly one of the things that we know is that there are different policing strategies that, in fact, can have very positive effects on the incidence of crime. So by reducing drug abuse to a public health model, by controlling and regulating and legalizing drugs. And let me explain something about that. I'm not advocating, this is my personal opinion. So the one thing that you will see with L.E.A.P, all of us agree that the war on drugs is a failure. Nobody knows what the post-prohibition model will look like. But what all of us agree is that every state in our nation should be allowed to design their own drug policies, and it should not have a federal oversight issue to it. So the drug policy in California will look different than the drug policy in Texas, which will look different than the drug policy in Vermont. So once we establish that the states need to do it, then we can come up with our experiments and use and create a system where our law enforcement leaders become stakeholders in that process. You remove the profitability from the gangs, and that's going to be one of the best things to do. Secondly, what it's also going to do is going to free up law enforcement resources to directly go after our most violent offenders. When I had our narcotics unit, we had somewhere between a 6 to 7 man surveillance team, and we didn't just do narcotics. Our special investigations unit also followed real bad guys and crooks. And so what I always saw is if we had a series of vehicle burglaries or a series of home burglaries or robberies, is if, in fact, we would identify who suspects were, surveil them, follow them around, build cases, watch them commit crimes in progress. By spending our resources in that type of environment, that had a greater impact on enhancing public safety because we would get those guys off the streets for longer periods of time. With drug dealers, it's the most expensive whack-a-mole game in the whole entire world. Every time, you see it in Mexico. Look at what we've done with regard to, going after alleged kingpins. You take down one kingpin, and then you have an increase in the violence rate because there's like 20 of the lieutenants that now want to be the kingpin. So it doesn't matter what we do with drug dealers.
Well,
we pop up one drug dealer, we whack them on the head, 20 more pop up.
Well, and we're going to take a break here in a minute. When we come back, I want to stay on that tack with the comparison with Mexico, because right now the immigration policy, everybody's worried about keeping our borders safe. And we're going to take a brief break, but when we do come back, we're going to be talking about the initiatives that Vicente Fox is taking, how he is coordinating efforts with, on a global perspective and with America on trying to curb the tide and the demand and the profitability of drugs. So we're going to take a brief break, and please stay with me, Diane, and we're going to go and take a break after these messages. We'll return with Executive Board Member Diane Goldstein, formerly of Redondo Beach, California law enforcement, and 22 years experience plus. And we're going to be back. We'll be talking about this. So let's just take a break, and we'll be right back.
Have you been arrested or are potentially facing criminal charges? You need a trial attorney who is well-versed in the courtroom. Joe Flores has handled hundreds of criminal cases and many of them to trial. Joe Flores can provide you with competent representation to protect your constitutional rights in state and federal court. Joe Flores can help if you have been arrested or facing criminal charges. The law offices of Joe Flores. Equal justice for all. Have you or a loved one suffered a stroke, heart attack, unexplained low blood pressure, or death during dialysis? The FDA has issued warnings and recalled the product GranuFlo and Naturalite used in dialysis. At least one national company failed to warn the public that over 900 people had suffered cardiac arrest or death. A condition called metabolic alkalosis developed, which may have caused the harm. Call the law offices of Joe Flores today. With a combined 25 years of experience in the medical field and as a trial lawyer, Joe Flores can help. Call now.
Hi, this is attorney and board-certified nurse practitioner Joe Flores on behalf of Vasquez Flores Home Health. Nursing homes have their place, but having care in your own home is very important. Call today for more information. Backed by over 20 years of experience, registered nurse Priscilla Vasquez can answer your questions about home care. Call 881-9922. That's 881-9922 today. And we're back after a brief break. You're watching South Texas Crossfire right here on KTMB on Time Warner, 300,000 subscribers strong, and also reaching out on YouTube. And you can also like us at Flores Law Firm and also Joe Flores, me, on Facebook. I've got the honor of bringing on Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, L.E.A.P, one of the board members, and that is Diane Goldstein. Welcome back, Diane. How are you?
Thank you very much, Joe. And again, not just I personally thank you, but L.E.A.P as an organization thanks radio hosts and other media representatives like you guys that allow us to get the message out.
Well, and I'm glad to have you on because the issue is that as a federal practitioner, I see the ridiculous sentences that are given out, and the judges' hands are tied sometimes. They have some discretion, but the guidelines in federal court, they do a great job. But the guidelines, minimum mandatories and things like that, and a lot of the time, even if they do cooperate, as you well know, it's in the government's discretion whether or not they're going to depart down or give them a break. So we've got those issues to deal with. The other issue we were talking about before the break was that you, as a law enforcement official for 22 years at Redondo Beach there in California, you were saying that if we decriminalize drugs and decrease the need and the profitability, you could catch more bad guys on very violent crimes. And what did you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by that is right now is the war on drugs takes a lot of law enforcement resources away from the primary focus of what law enforcement should be in some aspects. Probably the most telling statistics are with regard to the lack of solvability rates of crimes have actually plummeted in the last 40 years. So, for example, before we had the war on drugs, we were solving homicides at a rate that was about 80 to 90%. Currently, we only solve 6 out of 10 homicides. We only solve 6 out of 10 rapes. We only solve 1 out of 10 property crimes, and I think it's only 3 out of 7 violent robbery assaults.
Okay, so going back to that question, you've given us some great information about why that 6 out of 10. You're telling me that 6 out of 10 of these aggravated assaults, murders, they are not being caught. Is that what you're telling us?
Yeah, I am. And, it's interesting, and probably a good clarification or an example is you have to look at currently there is 400,000 untested forensic rape kits across our nation. And there was a CNN special that was done, and this doesn't just go back a year or two. This goes back decades. One of the reasons why they're untested is because, as you know as a practitioner, is that drug cases that are in custody take precedence from a crime lab in order to file cases.
Wow.
When you have 1.5 million arrests for drugs every year, it pushes things down onto a lower priority.
Well, let me ask you this. Okay, so the DNA's backed up. The investigations, maybe 40% are still going unsolved. If we freed up all these personnel that are being, farmed out to go do the drug investigations, where would they go? In other words, the police, what are they going to do with themselves if we decriminalize drugs and we didn't lock up so many people for drug offenses? Are you saying that they would just migrate to homicide, robbery, et cetera?
Yes, I am saying that. And we would be able to spend more time on doing community policing and working with our communities as collaborative stakeholders and partners and trying to design crime prevention programs based around long-term solutions, not short-term solutions. And that's what you see with the drug war. The drug war has made law enforcement incredibly efficient, and we can solve short-term problems, but we never fix it long-term. We've lost the long view of what policy should be designed to do.
Well, very well said. And, I can tell from the front lines myself is I don't see these huge dealers. I've never seen one big cartel guy being hauled into American courts. I've always seen the lower end dealers, and they're making a big deal about 1,000 kilos of marijuana, 2,000 kilos of marijuana, when that is just a tenth of what is going through a checkpoint per day. What do you see is the real impact of all these arrests? Are they really making an impact on the stopping of drugs into America?
What we catch from a business perspective would be what a restaurant would describe as slippage. We know the drug cartels send multiple loads into America, and they fully expect us to catch a certain percentage. We have not made a dent in preventing drugs from coming into America. And so, it's that ideological goal. We're trying to create a drug-free America and a free society. That's never going to happen.
Half of all Americans have tried marijuana, cocaine, some substance. Alcohol, 90%. I mean, if you compared alcohol to drugs in your years as a law enforcement official, how would you compare alcohol to marijuana as far as the damage it's done?
My standard line has been, as in my 22 years of street-level law enforcement, is I never once went to a home where someone who was under the influence of marijuana beat their wife, molested their children, or raped and pillaged and plundered the neighborhood, or attacked me as a law enforcement officer.
But on alcohol?
Alcohol, tons.
Wow. Wow. I mean, this is, ladies and gentlemen out there, this is so important. Don't change your channel, because we're onto something here. And I think this is a paradigm shift in thinking about, quote unquote, the war on drugs. Now, let's take a historical perspective, and I want to take advantage of all the knowledge base that you have and your training and experience. let's go back 40 years with Nixon and the 70s and 80s, and then with Reagan and the war on drugs, and just say no. How did this funding come about where it's become this multi-billion-dollar giant, this monster, and now that we're housing 1 out of 100 American citizens in prison? How did this come about?
You know, I think what happened is that politics got in the way instead of academic and scientific research. We know, going back to Nixon, that marijuana should have never been a Schedule I narcotic, and in fact, the Schaefer Commission reported that. But Nixon had his own view and used the perception of safety and security with Americans to support this goal. And we have been chasing our tails ever since then. It's interesting that I think that the American voters are more informed than the American political leaders on this matter.
It's unbelievable. I had some doctors calling me saying that now the medical board and DEA is going after them for treating patients for pain. They want to shut them down for giving Lortab, where they've done that for 40 years. And all of a sudden, you know, people come out and say, oh my God, people are popping pills at an astronomical rate. Is that even true?
It is. It's very interesting because right now, I mean, we're in a full-blown prescription drug opiate epidemic. Every 19 minutes, there's an American who dies from a opiate prescription drug overdose in our country. Yet, so instead of dealing with the education process around that or allowing research into cannabis, which has been shown to be an exit drug from harder prescription substances that can be abused, like Vicodin, you know, and other opiate-based medicine, is the DEA has tightened down on doctors who prescribe opiates and then medical marijuana clinicians as well. And it's all based on fear and rhetoric.
I mean, Diane, please tell me that there's a solution that can help. I mean, this dilemma that we're having. I mean, a lot more people are jumping on the train with law enforcement against prohibition. What strides are you guys making with Congress on trying to reverse this trend the last 40 years?
You know, LEAP is starting to really evolve, and one of the things that we're doing is we're working with local advocacy groups, national organizations, international drug organizations to try to affect the law from the UN level down to a grassroots level. We do it by public education. We do it by writing letters in support or in opposition of legislation. And so we've become, I think, incredibly effective for a group. And in fact, it's funny is now folks like Michelle Lenhart from the DEA are publicly acknowledging us where they used to not. And so we provide a balance to the rhetorical voices of law enforcement who only have one view. Interesting enough, here's something, and I'll ask you about it since you're in Texas. Have you heard about the Texas state troopers that have done unconstitutional body cavity searches looking for marijuana?
Yes, I have heard anecdotally about things like that. I have never had to work on that case before, but you know, it has just gotten out of hand what the infringements upon people's constitutional rights. And Texas is just one example of that. I think the majority of law enforcement officials do a great job, but this is out of hand.
It is. And I'll send you a couple blogs that I've written on it. But what I describe, you know, is law enforcement keeps looking at these transgressions by their officers individually, but they refuse to acknowledge that it's the policy that's the issue and the problem. You know, let's get over to Mexico. And what's going on down there is we know since we started sending Mexico money, huge amounts of money, going back to 2006, that the homicide rate in Mexico has gone up 150%.
And why is that?
Well, it's because, we are funding a war in Mexico trying to prevent drugs coming into the United States. But what we've seen is exactly that, is when Mexico, with the help of the DEA or the monies that we send, takes out a kingpin or a cell, 20 other drug dealers pop up and try to take over where that one kingpin was. And so we know that it's backfired. It is heavy-handed law enforcement backfires and creates more violence than it prevents.
Well, and the irony is that one of at least the cartels, the Zetas, were actually trained at Fort Bragg to defend, and then they said, hey, we can make more money actually being our own drug organization, and we have the knowledge, skill, and training. And just from a purely analytical and business perspective, they were right.
Yeah.
And they've been successful at it. But now, why do you think that the war has escalated so much in the last 6 years?
I think, quite frankly, in Mexico, it was almost like there was a truce before then. And not that I agree with the truce, but what happened is there was the initiative that helped fund the previous president's war on drugs down there. And we expended a lot of joint counter-narcotics operations money, intelligence, equipment. I think, in the last 5 years, we've sent Mexico something like $1.9 billion, all for border security, counterterrorism, and counter-narcotics. And what we know is it hasn't worked. And so finally, just a few days ago, Senator Leahy basically questioned the State Department's response, because what they did is for 2012, they had budgeted $229 million to go towards drug interdiction and border security to Mexico. And they released $134 million, but Leahy actually held up $95 million and said, no, we need to start discussing other alternatives to the drug war.
Well, and the use and treatment, how successful, if you're using the Portuguese model and we're coming back to America, instead of getting somebody with less than 2 ounces of marijuana in their possession, they had it on them, say at a concert or something, and they get arrested.
Well, here's the thing, Joe. We have to clarify and recognize that there's all sorts of drug use, a continuum in America, whether it's illegal or legal. Caffeine, cigarettes, alcohol, prescription drugs, marijuana use, medical, recreational, and everything else. What we don't recognize is that there's a difference between responsible drug use and irresponsible drug use and abuse. I'm not advocating, and L.E.A.P does not advocate the use of drugs. But we have to recognize that we have a finite, limited amount of resources to figure out who should go into rehabilitation. That's number one. Number two is we know that the numbers, that treatment is more effective than enforcement.
Gotcha.
We've had those numbers since the 1990s. The RAND report came out in, I think it was like 94, 96, that showed that drug treatment returned 7 times the value to the taxpayers for every dollar spent on drug treatment versus supply-side interdiction. Domestic enforcement was 4 times more expensive than treatment, and treatment was like 23 times more efficient and effective long-term.
Well, and touching on that, we got a couple of minutes left, but, these people also, when they have a record and they get out, they can't even get a job. They can't live in public housing. They've got a felony on their record for what? They didn't hurt anybody. They didn't beat anybody. They didn't abuse anybody. They got caught with marijuana, cocaine, pills, personal use, and instead of treatment right off the bat, they have a felony conviction. They can't even get financial aid to go to college and better themselves.
Joe, I'm an immigrant. I was born in Mexico City. I came up in the 1960s. We came up here, and my siblings and I all basically achieved the American dream in spite of a lot of lack of economic resources when we were growing up. And I hold dual nationality. I love America. It has given me opportunities that I don't think I ever would have had in Mexico. Given that, what the drug war has done, it has taken away that opportunity for not just immigrants coming into America, but all Americans. We have marginalized huge swaths of our society that falls mainly on the economically deprived, African Americans, Hispanics, and I think, to me, that is more troublesome, because that's not the America that I know and love, is when a murderer or a pedophile can get federal aid to student loan, and a kid who had a youthful indiscretion for smoking pot can't. There's something wrong with the system.
Yeah, we've got to turn it around. Closing arguments. Diane, you know I talk too much. I want to give you the floor the last couple of minutes. What do you want to tell our viewers in South Texas that are watching?
I actually want to address the Hispanic community, because what I find is, because we tend to be socially conservative and we don't support the control and regulation of marijuana or ending the drug war in some aspects, I would ask your Hispanic socially conservative listeners, that is what we're doing to our children morally justifiable in the quest for a drug-free America? Why have we ruined your children's opportunities for success when I, in high school, got stopped for smoking pot by law enforcement, and they took my pot away and threw it away and looked at it as, it's bad, it's youthful indiscretion, better handled by your parents and outside the law enforcement system.
That's right. That's right. I see these people that are coming in 12, 13 years old with a joint of marijuana, where a principal in 1980 would throw it away. It's absolutely ridiculous how the government has just gone absolutely crazy on prosecuting children and young people who have made a one-time mistake. And now they're trying to ratchet it back. So what would you tell law enforcement down here and in the federal courts, and especially our congressman, because I'm sending a copy of this to our congressman up in Washington of this interview. What would you tell the congressmen and their staff?
I would ask the congressmen what's more important, that they serve their constituents or that they retain their jobs. I do enough work within legislative circles that I know behind closed doors that most of our legislators will admit that the war on drugs is a failure, but they're afraid of not being reelected. And so it's up to us as their constituents to let them know it's safe for you to come out of the closet and to end this drug war.
Well, my hat's off to L.E.A.P for bringing that up and saying, wait, we've got to have a paradigm shift in thinking. It takes one courageous leader to do that, to say that, and then I encourage all the congressmen and senators to look at that the decriminalization of drugs and treatment and less incarceration. Diane, thank you so much for allowing us to interview you. It's been an honor, and we want to continue our series with L.E.A.P. And everything that you're sending over, we're going to be posting on this interview so people can go to the blogs, can go to the links, and learn more. And does L.E.A.P have a Facebook page yet?
The L.E.A.P does. You can find L.E.A.P on Facebook. We have over 80,000 people who've liked our page. It's at Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. You can follow us on Twitter at Cops Say Legalize. And you can go to our website at www.leap.cc. You can join L.E.A.P, become a member. We'd love to take your money and donations, because not a single one of our speakers or board of directors gets paid. This is primarily an all-volunteer organization. And so we're recruiting right now a lot. We're getting new voices every day that are coming to support us. In fact, the city attorney, Pete Holmes, from Seattle, recently became a member of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. So it's not just, the minion police officers like me, but we really have some incredibly powerful people that have recognized that we're going to be the voice to make the change.
Well, thank you. Diane Goldstein, ladies and gentlemen out there, she's a senior executive board member at L.E.A.P, 22 years of experience in law enforcement plus, and she's saying that we need to just revisit how we are treating people that are getting caught with drugs, and also the war on drugs, how it is not working. So learn more, look at our links, and thank you, Diane, so much. Have a great weekend, and God bless you.
Thank you very much, Joe. Really appreciate it.